The Nancy Pelosi crime family.
Mr. Reagan.
I just watched the Georgia Senate runoff, and I am pissed. Not only did they rig the general election, but they've apparently had the gall to come back and steal the Senate. The Democrats are criminals. They are a mafia. They're a cartel. And their leader, Nancy Pelosi, she learned all of her dirty tricks from an expert, her own father. In this video, I'm going to expose 3 generations of Pelosi family criminality. But first, I have to sell you something. Collagen is an essential building block in the youthfulness and glow of your appearance. Up to 90% of your skin is made of collagen. After 20 years, this essential ingredient decreases in natural production in your body. It decreases by 10% every decade. And that's why those who increase their collagen intake report experiencing younger looking skin and a youthful glow. It restores and strengthens their skin, hair, nails, teeth, muscles, joints, and gut health. Now, I have serious issues with my joints, and so I started taking collagen many years ago as a preventative measure. A little while ago, I switched to Ageless Multi-Collagen. This here, Ageless Multi-Collagen, you can see it's open. I genuinely am taking this stuff, right? Now, of course, I switched primarily because they started supporting my channel, obviously. But I was very happy to do so because Ageless Multi-Collagen is genuinely the best collagen on the market. And I would not say that if I did not truly believe it. Get yourself a bag of Ageless Multi-Collagen today while it's still 51% off. And as an added bonus, if you order today, you'll get free shipping, free VIP live health and fitness coaching for life. You'll get a free e-report on the 14 foods for amazing skin and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Go to healthwithreagan.com or click on the link in the description below. That's healthwithreagan.com and invest in your health by getting Ageless Multi-Collagen today. Elections are being rigged, our republic is spiraling down the drain, and yet Nancy Pelosi was once again elected as the Speaker of the House. Pelosi has been, in my view, the most destructive person in the U.S. federal government so far in the 21st century. She appears to control the Democrat Party at the moment, and in my view, that makes Nancy Pelosi something akin to a mafia don. She is the chief criminal in a sea of criminals. I have proposed on this show recently that I believe the reason we're seeing so few arrests in Washington, D.C. from William Barr, John Durham, the DOJ, the FBI, etc., is that there is so much corruption in D.C. that even good men cannot act justly. My theory is that there's a sort of blackmail ring in D.C. If you destroy me, I destroy you. And if you protect me, I'll protect you. That sort of thing. But vast, encompassing much of, if not most of, Washington, D.C. Now, Nancy Pelosi may not be at the very top of the food chain, but she's certainly one of the most powerful figures in the operation. Criminal kingpins all gain power the same way. They're the most ruthless, the most violent, and the most vicious men in a sea of ruthless, violent, and vicious men. They're the psychos who are willing to do what no one else will. You rule the gang by terror. And this is what Pelosi does. Her own daughter describes her mother this way.
She'll cut your head off and you won't even know you're bleeding.
This is not how smart businessmen think. Maybe it is in the movies, but not in real life. This is not how great men of history thought. Reagan or Lincoln or Eisenhower, even great generals, were never described this way. This is the way criminals are described. Her daughter thinks that this is a compliment. She'll cut your head off and you won't even know it. This is not a compliment. This is an apt description of a mafia don. But is this an appropriate description of her mother, Nancy Pelosi? Well, yes, it is. Because Nancy Pelosi does use mafia tactics. And she knows how to do these things, and she's willing to do these things because Nancy Pelosi was raised in a crime family. Nancy Pelosi was born Nancy D'Alessandro. Her father, Thomas D'Alessandro, or Big Tommy, as he was known, was a U.S. congressman from Maryland, and eventually he became the mayor of Baltimore. According to FBI records, Big Tommy D'Alessandro was a constant companion of one of Baltimore's top hoodlums, a guy named Benjamin Magliano, or Benny Trotta, as he was called. Benny had connections throughout organized crime, including with the Lucchese crime family in New York. Benny Trotta was also a boxing manager, and in the 1940s, the FBI were investigating Benny for an extensive draft dodging scheme involving several of the boxers he managed. Benny and all the boxers had falsely claimed to be essential workers. Sound familiar? They were essential workers at a ship cleaning company. And when the FBI discovered the scam, the owner of the ship cleaning company, John Cataneo, ratted them out. And it was through this investigation that it was discovered that Pelosi's father, Thomas D'Alessandro, mayor of Baltimore, was, quote, a constant companion of John Cataneo, Benjamin Magliano, and redacted, obviously some other criminal. Okay, so Pelosi's father had mafia connections. Does that mean that he was involved in criminal activity himself? Oh yes, he absolutely was. The FBI was informed by Cataneo, the owner of the ship cleaning company, that he'd contributed large sums of money toward the Democratic mayoral campaign of Big Tommy D'Alessandro. And they were told that in exchange, Cataneo was promised lucrative sanitation contracts for the city of Baltimore. As far as I can tell, the FBI never investigated this, which actually makes a lot of sense. You see, Big Tommy D'Alessandro was good friends with an important man who worked in the FBI at the time. You may have heard of him. His name, J. Edgar Hoover. In January 1961, President John F. Kennedy was considering D'Alessandro for an appointment to the U.S. Renegotiation Board. This was a government watchdog against profit gouging by defense contractors. However, Kennedy had heard about D'Alessandro's less than legal activities, and so he finally instructed the FBI to address the, quote, allegations of D'Alessandro's involvement with Baltimore hoodlums, with favoritism in awarding city contracts, and protection for political contributions and the prosecution of local cases. The investigation into D'Alessandro was never rigorously undertaken. Because of Hoover's interference, the FBI never properly investigated Nancy Pelosi's father, Thomas Big Tommy D'Alessandro. Big Tommy eventually ran for governor of Maryland, but he had to drop out because of his connection with another local criminal. According to Wikipedia, quote, D'Alessandro was a strong contender for governor of Maryland in 1954, but was forced to drop out due to being implicated in receiving undeclared money from Dominic Paracci, a parking garage owner convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. But the Wikipedia entry gives a pale impression of this actually very serious criminal connection. First of all, Paracci wasn't a parking garage owner. He was a building developer. And he wasn't just some random guy. Dominic Paracci was a close D'Alessandro family friend. Paracci made several payments to Big Tommy D'Alessandro, totaling $11,000, about $200,000 today. These were kickbacks. Basically, Paracci bribed Mayor Big Tommy for lucrative city development contracts, and Big Tommy took those bribes. Despite Paracci's conviction, though, somehow Nancy Pelosi's father never saw the inside of a jail cell. In fact, he never went to court. He was never even arrested. The powerful mayor got away with the scheme scot-free. I told you these two crime families were close. Well, they were so close, in fact, that 2 years before Paracci's criminal trial, Paracci's daughter and D'Alessandro's son, Nancy Pelosi's brother, were married. The wedding was called Baltimore's equivalent of the royal wedding, with 5,000 people in attendance. The wedding was even blessed by the Pope, and there was a wedding present from President Harry S. Truman. These were no ordinary folks. These were important people from major Baltimore families, major Baltimore crime families. And this is Nancy Pelosi's family history. This is how she was raised. Her father was a criminal, and his friends were criminals. I wonder how many wise guys were hanging around the house when Nancy was sitting down to her piano lesson or ordering the maids about. Anyway, this all gives us some insight into her tactics as Speaker of the House, and we can see the effect of her upbringing in her own activities. Pelosi has been engaged in all sorts of shady deals while she's been in Congress. Much of this is outlined in this book, Peter Schweitzer's 2011 masterpiece, Throw Them All Out. If you don't have this book and you want to know about some of the corruption in Washington, D.C., get a copy. In 2008, Pelosi invested in Visa. Now, this was the first public offering of Visa stock. It's called an IPO, the initial public offering. Visa first went public on March 19th, 2008, but somehow Pelosi got in a day early, March 18th, before anybody else. She and her husband were able to invest a small fortune at a bargain basement price before the public offering. Within a week, their investment had doubled in value. Now, why was Visa so generous to the Pelosis? Well, it might have something to do with a little bill that had recently been floated in Congress called the Credit Card Fair Fee Act of 2008. This bill was introduced just 2 weeks before Pelosi and her husband invested in Visa. interesting coincidence. Had this bill passed, it would have hurt Visa significantly. The bill combated a predatory monopolistic bargain that had been struck by all the major credit card companies. They'd basically agreed not to compete with each other so that they could all fleece the retailers that used their services. The bill was simple antitrust legislation. It had a lot of support in Congress, and it was a good bill. It should have passed. But by some miracle, the bill died. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, killed the bill. She made sure that it never even got a hearing on the House floor. Then, by some magical coincidence, Pelosi was given that amazing opportunity to invest in Visa before the public offering.
The access to initial public stock offerings, the opportunity to buy a new stock at insider prices just as it goes on the market. They can be incredibly lucrative and hard to get. And former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her husband had participated in at least 8 IPOs. One of those came in 2008 from Visa, just as a troublesome piece of legislation that would have hurt credit card companies began making its way through the House. Undisturbed by a potential conflict of interest, the Pelosis purchased 5,000 shares of Visa at the initial price of $44. 2 days later, it was trading at $64. The credit card legislation never made it to the floor of the House.
I will hold my record in terms of fighting the credit card companies as a Speaker of the House or as a member of Congress up against anyone.
It's funny how things just work out so well for some people. If I didn't know better, I might think Visa had contacted Pelosi ahead of time and told her that if she kills this bill, they'd give her this rare and extremely lucrative early opportunity to invest in the IPO before anyone else. I might think that, but of course, that couldn't be what happened because that's massively corrupt and Nancy Pelosi would never have done such a thing. The truth is, Nancy Pelosi and her husband have been able to invest in at least 10 unusually profitable IPOs throughout her tenure as Speaker of the House. Some people are just born lucky, I guess. I don't want to get censored by the YouTube overlord, so I'm not going to claim that Pelosi's power and influence as Speaker of the House is for sale. I'm not going to claim that if you can help her get even wealthier, then you too can influence federal legislation in a way that benefits your company. I'm definitely not going to claim that, because this would basically amount to taking bribes, and I would never say such a thing. And it's unclear how Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, made his initial fortune. I scoured the internet for far longer than I should have looking for this information, and nobody seems to know. He owns a financial investment firm and a real estate company. Apparently he made money doing those things, but how much money they started with before engaging in their shady schemes, I can't tell you. But the real estate business is important here because it seems to be the basis of one of Pelosi's most lucrative cons, increasing her wealth at the expense of the American taxpayer. How does the con work? Basically, the Pelosis buy some cheap property in an abandoned, rundown area around San Francisco. And then, when a bill is introduced into Congress, Nancy Pelosi slips in an earmark to divert federal tax dollars towards various development projects intended to improve the regions of San Francisco, which coincidentally are the very regions in which Nancy Pelosi herself owns property. So you buy cheap property from this rundown area, use American tax dollars to improve the region, and watch the value of your property skyrocket. That's the con. And it is a con. But again, I would hesitate to ever say anything about Princess Pelosi because she would never do anything wrong.
Nancy Pelosi is a champion of the children, a defender of the disenfranchised, a voice for the voiceless, a fabulous facilitator, a notorious negotiator, and a legendary legislator for such a time as this.
Okay, so we've established that Nancy Pelosi includes earmarks in federal spending bills that happen to increase her own fortune. Okay, but I'm sure she'd never arrange for friends or relatives or campaign donors to benefit from these earmark projects funded by federal tax dollars. I'm sure she'd never do anything like that. I mean, just because her father did, well, that doesn't mean she'd ever do any such thing. But actually, she did. There's at least one clear instance of this. Nancy Pelosi used the template provided by her father to repay at least one Democrat donor, billionaire Mark Benioff. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, don't care. Pelosi funneled over $1 billion federal tax dollars into a light rail project in San Francisco, which benefited Benioff's company, a company called Salesforce. Incidentally, Nancy Pelosi's husband himself heavily invested in Salesforce. And interestingly, the path of this light rail just happens to stop at an office building that Nancy Pelosi and her husband own. This office building is an incredibly lucrative part of the Pelosi network of businesses, raking in hundreds of thousands of dollars in rent for the Pelosis every year. And with the light rail stop, it should be even more valuable. So Pelosi was able to repay a campaign donor and make a little change on the side, all with that one little billion-dollar grift of the American taxpayer. How the voters of San Francisco can keep electing this woman is beyond my understanding. I mean, I'm guessing that they're unaware of all of this, but I mean, look, if you're a Democrat, I get it. You want to elect a Democrat, but why elect a con artist Democrat to the Senate? At least elect an idiot with naive and foolish principles like AOC. I mean, a criminal, a con artist? Really, guys? My guess is that the people of San Francisco actually fall for Pelosi's fake concern for black people and gays. Democrats of San Francisco, stop being so gullible. Pelosi is a con artist. She doesn't care about you. Pelosi only cares about Pelosi. Do something sensible for once and vote the Crypt Keeper out of office. The criminal activities of the Pelosi crime dynasty don't stop with Nancy Pelosi herself. In 2014, a business founded by Nancy Pelosi's son, Paul Pelosi Jr., was investigated by the SEC for fraud. This was a penny stock business specializing in investments in environmentally friendly companies. That's right, create climate change hysteria so that your son can exploit everybody that you frightened and get rich off them. It worked for Al Gore. Anyway, 4 employees at the company were charged with fraud, including the former governor of New Mexico, Tony Anaya. But somehow, Nancy's son Paul mysteriously avoided arrest, even though he owned the company. Nancy Pelosi is currently one of the most powerful people in our government, and she's essentially a mafia don, a criminal syndicate kingpin. It's disgusting. I began this video by discussing my concerns about the blackmail epidemic in Washington, D.C. I said that there are a few people at the top of this rat's nest of criminality, and I said that I believe that Nancy Pelosi is one of those top kingpins. Pelosi is often heralded as a tough politician. Pundits give her credit for being good at whipping the vote. Whipping the vote is a political term used to describe the pressure placed on members of a political party to vote in a particular way on a proposed bill. If Nancy Pelosi wants Democrats to vote in a certain way, she'll give you a call and she'll pressure you. How does she pressure these Democrats in Congress? Well, that's not clear. These phone calls are not made public. But if you had a little dirt on each member of Congress, it would sure come in handy when you're trying to whip the vote. Now, look, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about Pelosi. Maybe she's an innocent dove. Who knows? But I do think that for the daughter of a corrupt mayor, a student of mafia tactics, there's no better job in which to ply your trade. Well, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just that they elect criminals to public office. Now, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please do so now. Good night.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening.